Did you know that the journey of the young shepherd David, the youngest among his brothers, would forever change the history of a kingdom? Get ready to learn about the steps of a simple shepherd who was chosen for something great. In the village of Bethlehem, among the green hills of Israel, lived Jesse with his 8 sons. David, the youngest, was relegated to simple tasks and often forgotten by his own family. While his older brothers stood out as soldiers or imposing figures, David spent his days tending the sheep. He was a young man of modest appearance, but he carried within him something that few could see, an upright heart and an unshakable faith in God. The change began when the prophet Samuel was sent by the Lord to Jesse's house. Samuel had been given the mission to anoint a new king for Israel, someone to replace Saul, whose disobedience and pride had led God to reject him. Upon arriving, Samuel observed Jesse's older sons, impressed by their appearance and posture. However, God warned him, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for the Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." David, who had not even been called for the presentation, was only remembered after Samuel insisted on seeing all of Jesse's sons. When the young shepherd boy was finally brought in, still smelling of sheep, God spoke to Samuel's heart, "This is he." Right there, in front of his unbelieving family, David was anointed with oil, while the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in a powerful way. That moment was the beginning of an extraordinary journey. However, David did not assume the throne immediately. He returned to his humble routines in the fields, demonstrating patience and obedience. Meanwhile, in the palace, King Saul was facing spiritual torments. His advisors suggested bringing in a skilled musician to play the harp and ease his suffering. Not coincidentally, David, known for his deep and comforting melodies, was called. Unbeknownst to him, he was entering the circle of power for the first time. David's presence brought peace to Saul, but the young man sensed that there was something deeper in his connection with the king and the palace. He watched and learned silently. At the same time, David continued to trust in God, knowing that God's plan was greater than any immediate circumstances. However, the event that would mark the beginning of David's public recognition was yet to come. The war between the Israelites and the Philistines brought a giant named Goliath onto the scene. Everyone feared facing him, and Saul himself was paralyzed by doubt. But David, guided by courage and the certainty that the Lord was fighting on his side, took the lead in the battle, armed only with a sling, 5 smooth stones, and an unwavering faith. The atmosphere in the Israelite camp was tense. Day after day, Goliath, the Philistine giant, appeared in the valley, challenging the army of Israel with words of mockery and insults. His enormous size, combined with the heavy bronze armor that gleamed in the sun, made even the bravest of men hesitate. For 40 days, this spectacle of humiliation was repeated, and no one dared accept the challenge. David arrived at the camp almost by chance. Sent by his father, Jesse, to bring supplies to his brothers who were serving in the army, he was just a messenger. However, when he heard Goliath's words and saw the fear that gripped the warriors of Israel, something stirred in his heart. He could not understand how an army that served the living God could cower before one man. With the boldness that was characteristic of him, David began to ask, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David's questions soon reached the ears of King Saul, who sent for him. When David presented himself, his eyes shone with determination. He declared, "Let no one be discouraged because of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight against him." Surprised, Saul hesitated. After all, David was just a young man, with no military training, while Goliath had been a seasoned warrior since his youth. But David responded with confidence, "Your servant has faced lions and bears to protect my father's sheep. The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear, will also deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Faced with such faith, Saul allowed David to go, offering him his own armor. However, the weight of the armor did not match the simplicity and agility of the shepherd. David chose to trust only in his sling, his staff, and, above all, in the power of God. With firm steps, David went down to the valley to face Goliath. The giant mocked him, laughing at his youth and apparent weakness. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" But David responded with words that echoed like thunder in the silence of the battlefield. "You come to me with sword, spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The battle was short but decisive. Before Goliath could advance, David swung his sling and hurled a stone that struck the giant in the forehead, knocking him down instantly. The Philistine army, seeing their fallen champion, fled in despair. With that act of faith and courage, David not only defeated Goliath, but earned the respect of the people and began his rise as a hero in Israel. However, this victory had unexpected consequences. Saul, who had initially rejoiced in David's triumph, soon began to see him as a threat. The people sang in the streets, "Saul has slain thousands, but David tens of thousands." Envy and jealousy began to take hold of the king's heart, planting the seeds of a conflict that would forever change David's life. After defeating Goliath, David became a prominent figure in Israel. He was received with great joy by the people, who saw in him a liberator and symbol of hope. However, as the people's admiration grew, Saul's heart sank deeper and deeper into the shadows of jealousy. The king, who had initially welcomed David into his palace, now saw in him a dangerous rival, someone capable of taking the throne. The relationship between the two became strained. David, for his part, did not seek to challenge Saul. On the contrary, he continued to demonstrate loyalty and humility, serving in the king's army and winning victory after victory in battles against the Philistines. These achievements only increased the people's love for David, fueling Saul's hatred even more. Blinded by envy, the king tried several times to take David's life, even throwing a spear at him in a moment of rage. Aware of the danger, David found support in an unlikely friend, Jonathan, Saul's son. Jonathan recognized God's goodness and purpose in David's life, and even though he was the natural heir to the throne, he chose to protect his friend. They made a pact, swearing loyalty to each other. Jonathan warned David of his father's plans, allowing him to escape ambushes and flee into the wilderness. David spent years living as a fugitive, hiding in caves and remote territories. Although he was constantly surrounded by danger, he gathered a loyal group of followers, men who believed in his leadership and God's plan for his life. During this time, David demonstrated extraordinary character, refusing to raise his hand against Saul, even when given clear opportunities to do so. On one occasion, David and his men found Saul sleeping in a cave where they were hiding. His followers urged him to seize the opportunity to kill the king and take the throne he had been promised. But David refused, saying, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed. I will not raise my hand against him, for he is consecrated by God." Instead, he discreetly cut off the corner of Saul's robe as proof that he could have harmed him but chose not to. This act of honor impressed even Saul, who momentarily acknowledged David's righteousness, declaring, "Now I know that you will be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands." However, this respite was brief. Saul's jealousy soon took over, and the persecution continued. Despite the adversities, David remained steadfast in his faith and trust in God's plan. He composed psalms that expressed his emotions, cries, and praises to the Lord. His life as a fugitive was marked not only by external struggles, but also by profound spiritual growth. He learned to depend completely on God, even when there seemed to be no way out. Meanwhile, Saul's reign grew increasingly unstable. He faced military defeats, internal conflicts, and a separation from divine guidance. Increasingly isolated, the king headed toward the tragic end of his story, while David continued on his journey, patiently awaiting the moment when God would place him on the throne of Israel. The tension between David and Saul reached its climax as the fate of the kingdom began to hang in the balance. While Saul continued his obsessive persecution, David maintained his integrity, refusing to usurp the throne by violent means. His patience, however, was continually tested as he saw challenges growing both within and without Israel. During this time, the Philistines, longtime enemies of God's people, intensified their attacks, threatening Israel's borders. Saul's kingdom, weakened by the king's instability and impulsive decisions, was unable to offer effective resistance. David, on the other hand, became an increasingly recognized figure as a leader. He acted as a protector of small towns and cities, defending the people against invaders, while expanding his empire. Influence and earned the respect of all. The tragedy that marked Saul's end came in a decisive battle against the Philistines. At Mount Gilboa, the army of Israel was defeated, and Saul, finding himself surrounded, chose to take his own life rather than fall into the hands of his enemies. His sons, including Jonathan, also perished in the battle, leaving a void in the leadership of the kingdom. The stage was finally set for David to assume the role for which God had prepared him for so many years. When he received the news of the deaths of Saul and Jonathan, David did not celebrate. Instead, he mourned deeply, composing a funeral song that extolled the bravery of the king and the loyalty of his friend. How the mighty have fallen! David lamented, demonstrating once again his noble character and his reverence for the divine calling that had once rested upon Saul. With the throne now vacant, David was proclaimed king over the tribe of Judah, while Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was placed as king over the rest of Israel by Abner, commander of Saul's army. This period was marked by conflict between the two kingdoms, but David never lost sight of God's promise of unification. He ruled with wisdom and justice, gradually winning the hearts of the people. After Ishbosheth's death, David was finally anointed king over all Israel. He established his capital in Jerusalem, a city that became a symbol of the unity of God's people. One of David's first acts as king was to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, reaffirming his commitment to the Lord and centralizing worship throughout the kingdom. David's reign was marked by military conquests, territorial expansion, and a deep devotion to God. He was not perfect, his mistakes and failures are recorded honestly, but his heart remained focused on the Lord, always seeking divine restoration and forgiveness. David's journey from shepherd to king is a testament to God's sovereignty and the transformative power of a willing heart to obey. His story continues to inspire generations, showing that true greatness lies in following the Creator's plan, even when the path seems uncertain.